Good morning and welcome to day 8 of F260 at First Baptist Meridian. Today we look at two of my favorite chapters in the Old Testament, Genesis 11 and 12, the Tower of Babel, or Babylon, same word in Hebrew, and the call of Abram, who becomes Abraham. Just to put that in perspective, in Genesis 1 through 11, creation through the Tower of Babel, you go from eternity past to about 2100 BC in just 11 chapters. How much fast forward is going on there? Once Abraham enters the picture, the remaining 80% of the book of Genesis is only 4 generations: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Something really important is going on with Abraham. And to put that in perspective, let's look at the Tower of Babel. Like I said, the Tower of Babel stands at the end of Genesis 1 through 11. And Genesis 1 through 11 is dominated by this cycle. God does something good, but we sin, mess it up, bring on God's judgment. But after God judges sin, he always provides grace to move the story forward. So good, very good. Adam and Eve eat of the tree. Sin and death enter the human condition. They're removed from the Garden of Eden, but they also become parents. Very next chapter, Cain kills Abel. Sin. God judges Cain. He becomes a wanderer who is marked, but he's allowed to continue to flourish and build. Grace. By Genesis chapter 6, mankind as a whole thinks only evil thoughts in his heart all the day long. So God punishes sin by means of this flood. But grace, God preserves Noah and his family. And this just continues until you get to Genesis chapter 11. The other thing that's very important to note is that when God set this whole thing in motion through creation, the heavens and the earth were created together. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But the more that sin has entered the picture, the more it feels like there's a distance between those two realities. The way it is where God is and the way it is where we are. The fellowship we had when sin wasn't part of the picture, and the way we relate to God once sin is part of the picture. And so God creates by speaking things into existence and seeing that they are good. And so speaking and seeing become huge in the Old Testament. And I think you'll see all of that come together in Babylon, or Babel, and Abram. Notice it says in 11:4, they said, speaking, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky," literally in Hebrew, in the Shemayim, the heavens. "Let us make a name for ourselves, otherwise we will be scattered throughout the earth." So, whereas God created the heavens and the earth, look what they're doing. They're building a tower from earth into the heavens. It's like they're trying to close that gap that is formed on their own strength. But they're not doing so for the glory of God's name. They're doing so to make a name for themselves, for their glory. They don't want to be scattered. But what has always been the result of sin to this picture, to this point of the story? Adam and Eve were sent out of the Garden of Eden, scattered. Cain became a wanderer, scattered. The flood and the displacement of the ark, even, scattered. And so it shouldn't surprise us when God sees this scene. God came down to look over the city and sees this. And what does God do? God scatters them and confuses their speech, the very instrument of creation. And so their sin, their pride, their hubris, their usurping of God's glory, there's judgment, the confusion of their speech, and their scattering. Where's the grace? And the grace is in the calling of Abraham. God says, "Go out from your land, your relatives, and your father's house." Rather than traveling, being scattered as a result of sin, God calls Abraham to travel as part of his plan of grace. "And I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you." Rather than the curse of sin, the blessing of God's mission. "And I will make your name great." Rather than Abraham being like the people of Babel, seeking to make a great name for himself, God says, "I will make your name great." And you get a great picture into how redemption works biblically. It doesn't start with this ground up movement where we make things right with God. It starts with this heaven to earth initiative where God works in us, on us, and through us to make things right in the world. And God ultimately says to Abraham, I'm going to bless you so much that through your descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed. What's interesting, that plays a huge role in the New Testament. In fact, it's interesting when so many of those promises become fulfilled in Jesus Christ, what happens? God comes down to us in Jesus, the incarnation. Jesus is put up on the cross by people, sinful man. As a result, he's put down in the tomb, but God raises him up from the grave and he ascends to his Father. And as a result of that, what happens at Pentecost? Acts chapter 2. The very opposite of Babel. Rather than men building a tower up to God, God sends his Spirit down on his church to build it up. Rather than people speaking the same language only to be confused at the end of the story, at Pentecost, people speak many languages, and yet everyone hears in their own. At Babel, it results in sinful nations being scattered. In Pentecost, it results in a spirit-filled church being sent to glorify God to the ends of the earth, to fulfill the promises to Abraham, and to do the work of God's eternal kingdom. Stuff to think about. We'll unpack it the next few days as you keep reading, reflecting, and responding. God bless.